Welcome to the Business Talk, a global podcast series that highlights distinguished faculty members and their impactful scholarly contributions. I'm Deepak, your host from India. We are honored to welcome Dr. Koen Pauwels as our distinguished guest on today's episode. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce the guest for today's episode. Dr. Koen Pauwels is a distinguished professor of marketing at Northeastern University in Boston, where he also co-directs the Digital Analytics, Technology, and Automation Initiative. Widely recognized for his work at the intersection of marketing science and real-world impact, he bridges academic rigor with practical relevance. He plays a leading role in shaping the field globally, serving as senior editor for both the Journal of Marketing and the International Journal of Research in Marketing. He is also president-elect of the Academic Council of the American Marketing Association and vice president of practice at the Informed Society for Marketing Science. In addition, he contributes to the broader marketing community through his roles on the board of House of Marketing and the editorial boards of the Journal of Retailing and Journal of Interactive Marketing. Notably, he founded the Marketing Dynamics Conference in 2004, creating a global platform for scholars exploring dynamic marketing challenges. Beyond academia, Dr. Pauwels has advised organizations across three continents, from global giants like Amazon, Microsoft, Unilever, and Sony to leading consumer brands such as Heinz, Kraft, and Marks and Spencer. His consulting work focuses on enhancing marketing effectiveness, advancing attribution and marketing mix models, designing field experiments, integrating online and offline strategies, and building long-term brand value. He is also an active voice in the field, regularly sharing insights on marketing return on investment through his writing and social media. In today's episode, Dr. Koen Pauwels joins us to unpack the central ideas from his book. It's not the size of the data, it's how you use it. Smarter marketing with analytics and exports. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Koen Pauwels to the conversation. Professor Koen, it's a distinct privilege to welcome you to Business Talk. We are grateful to you for accepting our invitation.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Deepak. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Professor, in the book, you argue that most firms are growing in data, but starving for insight. How do you help a leadership team shift its mindset from collect more data to decide what truly matters when building a marketing analytics dashboard?
That's a great question. And indeed, the starting point for the book was that there was a big data hype, just like now there's an AI hype. And so people are saying, hey, we have to get this. We have to get the technology. We have to get the data. And then magically our life will get better. And that's definitely not the case. So the organizations that I'm helping typically don't know exactly what to do with the small data they had before, let alone big data or now web data and so forth. So I think it's important to work backwards from your decision. And that's what this book does. It says, hey, what kind of decisions do you have to make? Which kind of information you need for these decisions? And then from there, how would you now design your measurement system and your also your workflow and your teams to make sure that the right people get the right information for these decisions? And so dashboards come in as an interesting way to align interest across the organization. And I would say to answer four basic questions that really make any meeting much more efficient. Question number one is, what happened? So wouldn't it be nice to have everything that had happened that matters to your organization at your fingertips? And that it's shared by everybody. So you don't have to spend half of the meeting to discuss, what was actually going on. Number two, why did it happen? And of course, there we still need a lot of human interpretation. But a lot of smart algorithms can give you likely explanations why something happened. And so that just helps the discussion. And then, of course, once you get from what happened and why happened for decisions, it's important to know what would happen if some of your proposals get implemented. And then finally, what should happen, right? So what is optimal or what is in the best interest? So answering these four questions, what happened, why it happened, what will happen if we do a proposal, and what should we do, your marketing measurement system and a good dashboard that really helps decision-making could really move you forward.
Professor, you emphasize starting with a clear vision before jumping into tools or KPIs. If a chief marketing officer came to you tomorrow and said, "We want a dashboard," what are the first three questions you would ask them before even talking about metrics or vendors?
Oh, so the three questions I always ask is number one, how do customers make decisions in your category and country? Number two, what would you ideally use as a measurement of them? And number three, what are the metrics that we have? So let me get specific there, right? So the first thing I ask is, with your knowledge of your locale and your industry, how do customers really make decisions and what really needs to happen for you to be successful? And so, to give you an example, when I moved from the US to Istanbul, I started working with the same car company that I had in the US. And I was so proud that they had the number one car Facebook page in the country. And they basically believed that this would give them lots of more sales of their new cars. But their market share was stuck at like 2%. So I asked them, well, what is absolutely necessary to get people in your new cars? And they're like, oh, that's easy. It's a test drive. So we want people to come in for a test drive. I'm like, okay, let's get some data on the Facebook followers and engagement, and let's try to correlate that with test drives. And there was zero correlation. So obviously this was a problem and we had to dig deeper there. So I think every manager can do that on a napkin or a whiteboard. Hey, these are some stages. You can call that the funnel. You can call that the decision journey that the people that matter to us as an organization have to go through, right? And this could be things like just knowing that your company exists, awareness. It could be, being interested, put it in their consideration set, subscribe to your newsletter. And then finally, of course, talk positively about it and loyalty and all that good stuff. So once you have that mapped out, then we look at, okay, how would you now ideally measure these key success factors? So ideally, what would you like to know to do that? And only then do we go to which metrics and data you actually have. A lot of them are just given to you for free by the platform. Let's say, Facebook engagement or YouTube view through. And then we compare that with the metrics you ideally want, and we'll see how big the discrepancy is. So if the gap is pretty small, they're good proxies. And so we typically do an initial pilot test, the low-hanging fruit, right, with the data you have and connecting them with your outcome. But then also later on, this is a great 2x2 map, kind of data quality and how important is it for us to get better data on it one, to see, hey, if we have some more resources, if we spend some money on measurement, where do we have the biggest bang for a buck? So why should we get better in measurement? And basically that has the biggest impact on our decisions.
Professor, many organizations are obsessed with finding a single silver bullet metric.
Yeah.
In the book, you suggest this is an illusion. Can you share a story where chasing one headline metric actually misled a company, and how a richer set of leading indicators changed the decisions they made?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm going to pick up my favorite one, which is the Net Promoter Score, NPS, suggested by Reichelt, my good friend and colleague, all the way in the end of the 90s. So he came up and he said, you only need to measure one thing. You ask a whole bunch of people, would you recommend my company to others? And yes or no. And then he divided them in, like, if they say 9 or 10, they're promoters, less than 5 detractors. And so that's the only thing you need to know. Now, research-wise, what comes out of that is, number one, that's not a good metric at all. It makes, intuitively sense, but it scores worse than just average customer satisfaction in all of the research studies. So yes, asking customers is really important. And yes, knowing if they recommend you is also really important. But there's other metrics that do a much better job in predicting that. And so to give you the specific example, I was working with a very big Dutch-based electronics company. They're worldwide. And so they wanted me to come with a single metric to summarize online sentiment about their company. And they were going to reward and publish managers on it in countries. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, I have to give you two metrics. So if you, let's say, compare, India with Turkey, right? And you're launching a new shaver or a new electronics thing, because all the research shows that net sentiment is important. So this is positive minus negative comments online, but the volume is also really important. So you actually get more sales if a lot more people are talking about your new shaver, even if they're talking negatively. This is a really cool insight. And so I'm like, look, I need to have the volume and I have to know what we call valence, right? Positive or negative. And these two things have very distinct, separate influences on your sales. And they're like, yeah, but we still only want one metric. So they ultimately went with the positive versus negative, and they went wrong because, you can have very few people talking about your shaver and saying mostly positive stuff. And by the way, nowadays, you're not sure if they're real or AI, right? Or you can have a lot of people talking about you with animation and giving lots of great long customer reviews, highlighting both positive and negative. And that has a much bigger positive impact on your sales. So that's an example how people go wrong, just looking at the ratio of positive negative, whereas they should have been looking at the overall volume of the comments.
Professor, one core message of the book is that dashboards must link marketing activities directly to business performance, not just report clicks or impressions. What does a truly performance-linked dashboard look like in practice? And how is it different from typical reporting dashboard most companies use today?
Yeah. So going back to the 4 questions that I had, right? So typical reporting dashboards do answer what happens, but not what would happen if. And that's absolutely key. And that's the analytic part in the dashboard. So the dashboards that I make, so you start with the mental map of the managers and then you put data to it. And so you actually have conversion metrics. So for instance, that if you want to increase your revenue by 10%, then you probably have to improve a KPI by 20%, and then which marketing actions will help you get there. So that's what I mean with an analytic dashboard. And so what it needs to have is model and data underneath it, right? You need to have a model that you have estimated on historical data or on experiments or on multi-touch attribution that tells you, well, on average, if I do X, then Y KPI changes, and that gives then Z sales outcome, let's say, right? And so anything that doesn't have this, what I call the first part, marketing responsiveness. So your KPI should respond to something that you can do. Otherwise, it's very, unmotivating. So it could be, let's say, that whatever the leader of your country does is very important to your business, but you can't affect it. Then that's not a very useful metric on your analytical dashboards, because it's not motivating for your team, because that's not a lever that they can pull. And then the other side is sales conversion. So if sales or profits or donations, if you're not for profit, right, is your ultimate, I would say, hard outcome metric, then the model should show that your KPI changes ultimately convert into that hard outcome metric. And so my specialization is long-term marketing effects modeling with econometrics. So these kind of models help you to show that, hey, if my customer awareness changes, or my Facebook engagement, or my, Amazon page views, by, let's say, 50%, this is how much and at which time ultimately you could expect the sales results.
Professor, you devote several chapters to selecting and refining key performance indicators and leading performance indicators. What are some of the most common mistakes you see when teams choose KPIs, and how do you guide them to eliminate vanity metrics and focus on what actually drive profit and growth?
So I think number one, anytime you ask somebody, especially a consultant, they just want you to add KPIs, right? So I have consulted companies that had like 200, 250 KPIs. And so the first thing I do in my analysis with some historical data is to say, well, I check marketing responsiveness and sales conversion, but I also see whether it's a leading indicator of sales. Why is this important? A lot of the proxy metrics are changing at the same time as sales, right? And so they may be interesting diagnostically to say, hey, our sales are down. Why? What happened? But they don't really help you to take remedial action before the bad thing happens in the marketplace. So typically in my analysis, I narrow down about 200 metrics to maybe just 5 to 10 that are really leading in sales. And I have lots of examples in the book of companies that I did that with, right? That some metrics that you say, hey, So I'll give you a typical example. People's awareness of your brand and sales. So you could say attitude change comes before behavioral change. So I'm in an industry that people have to really know me and understand me before they buy me. Then it would be a leading indicator. In lots of other industries, I say, for instance, Powell's chewing gum. I'm making something up, right? If I make a new chewing gum, then I don't have to convince you that it's the best chewing gum. I just have to be there at retail where you go shopping. And I basically, when you see Powell's chewing gum and you have a little bit of brand recall, you're like, oh, let me try that one. It is low risk. So there, kind of your awareness of Powell's chewing gum happens at the same time as you buying it. So awareness can be just changing at the same time as sales, and I don't have to really kind of, spend a lot of time on it. Compare that to me opening a new Powell's bank in India, making this up, right? So in order for me to be successful as a bank, I need to change your mind and how you think about it. I need you to believe that the bank is real, it exists. I probably need to do both offline and online stuff. I have to have a very beautiful building that makes you trust my bank and think that, hey, it's still going to be around in 5 years. And I have to do lots of online activities, and I have to slowly change your attitude, whether you know me and consider me. And these are going to be leading indicators. So typically it's just 5 to 10 of these KPIs that really change before sales change, and therefore they indicate whether you're going in the right direction, if you're doing a big marketing campaign, for instance, or whether you're really in trouble. So lots of brands have found out that KPIs are a good early warning system. So if people kind of slowly fall out of love with you, but are still inert, or there's not a good competitors, right? So weeks or months before they switch sometimes, they indicate in surveys or in their online behavior that they don't like you that much anymore. And these are the kind of leading indicators that you want.
Professor, gaining IT support and building a rock-solid database are big themes in the book. For marketers who don't speak tech, what practical strategies have you seen work best to create a real partnership with IT rather than a tug of war over data, tools, and priorities?
Well, I think one of the chapters in that book is called, business people are from Mercury and IT is from Jupiter, right? so by which I mean kind of the speed and the considerations are different. And part of being a marketing in a company is to really understand where other people are coming from. You don't just have to get into the mind of customers, but also in the mindset of your colleagues within the same organization. So your CEO, the chief financial officer, and your chief operations officer or IT person, they have very different kind of typical personalities than you, but also priorities. So business people like to do things extremely fast, and they look for change, and they want to jump on opportunities, right? And they kind of champion ideas. That's what we're typically known for in marketing. IT people like to take a step back. That's why I say they're from Jupiter. They say, well, what will it all take to maintain the system? And, if we have all these ad hoc requests, how do we make sure it doesn't completely exhaust our resources or our people, and somebody has to maintain and fix all of this? So sitting together with IT and really being patient and mapping out and thinking about what you will probably need in the next at least 3 to 6 months, hopefully more, that will really help. So one of the nice things about the book is that it really invites you to sit together with key stakeholders in your company and kind of map out, okay, if this is what's really important to the business, right? And we really want to measure this correctly and reliably over time, over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years. What are the most efficient and the best measurement systems? So I would say involve them as a key stakeholder from the beginning. Make them understand that you're not just out to argue for your side of the business or make money, but you also want to be a good steward of the company's resources, and that you understand where they're coming from. I think that goes a long way.
Professor, the book came out at the onset of the big data wave, yet many firms still struggle to use even their small data effectively. Looking back, what has aged best from your original framework, and what have you updated in light of the omnichannel walled gardens and today's privacy and data governance pressures?
So yes, I mean, a key reason for me to write the book, except that I really wanted to be useful to managers, is that I'm also teaching this in universities and to MBA students. And I didn't see a good textbook available to me. I was assigning lots of different things from different articles and chapters and blogs. So I think it still is a very nice framework to put everything together. What I would update is number one, the wonderful things that AI can really help us. And so I'll give you an example, right? So the book is written in hourglass fashion, as all of my papers too. So I start very broadly, kind of what decisions are you making, which industry are you in, and at the end I also give very practical implementation advice. But in the middle there's some beefy parts that talk about mathematical models and how to estimate things and how to come up with the return on marketing investment, which may be a bit more mathematically advanced. And so AI is so fantastic in helping us as students of life to get up to date in that one. So when I teach this, for instance, a lot of my students, they do struggle with regression analysis. And I always told them, look, you don't have to be an expert in it. I just want you to be a smart consumer of these kinds of reports. Because as a manager, you don't have to know what's under the hood of the car. You just have to be able to drive it, right? So there's a few things you have to know. But you have to know a little bit about how the engine works and trust it enough. And so thanks to the book or my course, if you take it, you will be able to ask very smart questions to your analysts or a third-party vendor that offers you consultancy, right? And so that's what I mean by being a smart consumer. And I think the tools we have now, including vibe coding and AI, make it a lot easier for non-specialists to be very smart consumers, asking the right questions and kind of, kick the tires of the car a bit to see how robust these recommendations are to slight changes in the conditions.
Professor, talk about including emerging channels and designing KPIs for online and social media, not just traditional brand tracking and CRM. Can you walk us through an example where integrating online behavior data with offline metrics on a dashboard change a company's understanding of its customer journey?
Yeah. It does. So this is research I did with Google in the Netherlands a while ago, and they came to me simply saying, "Hey, we can get rid of all the survey metrics. We don't have to ask people anything anymore about which brands they know or like. We just see what you do online." And I'm like, well, that's an interesting research question. So we went out and we got, I would say the broadest data set that I ever got. So 36 brands in 15 very different business to consumer categories. So everything from soup and yogurt to beer, which is apparently very important in the Netherlands, to kind of insurance, cars, and the more high involvement stuff. And so what we did for each of these brands, we tracked on a weekly level sales, their online behavioral metrics, like how many people visit your website, what do they say about you, and then also measured survey metrics, awareness, consideration, and so forth. So now what we found was really interesting. Of course, there was some difference, low and high involvement, but the biggest learning was that if you want to kind of correlate and explain same week sales, the online metrics are enormously strong. So if you have an uptake in your website visits and so forth, you will see an uptake almost right away in your sales. However, if you want to predict kind of a few months out, 3 to 6 months out, the online metrics change way too fast. There's way too much noise. So 1 week you go viral because people like whatever you did on TikTok. The next week your competitor goes viral, and it changes like crazy. And so in the long term, it kind of evens out. So if you want to predict your brand fortunes in 3 to 6 months, then the offline metrics are way more important. And the reason is that what people do, including online, is only what they do, but not why they do it. And so asking people, and you can do that very efficiently now with very small surveys, asking people why they do what they do is going to be very important for the future of your brand. I'll give you one example with Microsoft, right? So Microsoft did a study and it says, hey, all the people that come to our website, are they really prospects to buy something new? And it turns out no. So 55% of all of the people already have a Microsoft product and they're not in the market for a new one. And they go online because they want to, check whether something doesn't work or they want more information or something like that. So most of their web traffic is not prospects. It's people that have already bought it, and it's lagging to people buying stuff, right? In in the econometrics thing. So it's not, just because somebody comes to your website that they're interested in buying. It could be because they have problems with what you already sold to them. It could be because they already decided for your competitor's product, but they have to justify to their spouse or their boss why you suck, why they wouldn't choose you. So there's lots of reasons why people could do what they do. And instead of just being hopeful as a marketer that they do it because they love your brand, it's really important to ask them. So one example from the Dutch one was a beer brand that asked people whether they're in love with the brand, engaged, or married to the brand. And so they saw the number of people in love with them dropping, even though their sales were holding up right steady. And they did identify that there was some kind of alienation, and partly due to upcoming competition that they were able to deal with before their sales were affected.
Professor, dashboard only adds value if people actually use it to make decisions. Yeah. What have you learned about the human side, habits, incentives, storytelling that help teams move from passive dashboard viewing to actively running experiments, relocating budgets, and holding campaigns accountable?
So yeah, I always say when people say, hey, you calculate the ROI for us, but what is the ROI of hiring you? And I always say, well, it's zero if you're not willing to reconsider a decision. So here's what I mean with this, right? So a lot of the things I do is to reduce people perceived risk. And I'm very aware of that one. So at some point when I was in Istanbul, I went to a chief marketing officer of a big chocolate brand. And I said, hey, I can show you that half of your $200 million ad budget is wasted. I can save your company $100 million right now. And he was completely not interested. You know what he told me? He's like, Koen, if I do that and you're right, then I don't see 1 cent of the 100 million. It all goes to my boss. But if I lose 0.5% market share, I get fired. So the risk asymmetry was very different, right? And so typically, what are your biggest risks? You're going to change something dramatically in your marketing budget or allocation or in your products, right? And you're afraid to upset people, including customers, but also retailers, other people in your company. And no model can kind of deal with all the risks, right? So what I typically propose is MEME, as I labeled it. So it's model, experiment. And here's what I mean. So I typically come in and together with you, and we went over that in the past questions, I get some historical data and I use my econometrics to see, in the last, let's say 2 years, every time you did X, the customers and the competitors did Y, and then the overall impact of your sale was Z. So with just historical data, without you having to change anything, I come up with how do people react to your price changes, to your marketing communication changes, to your new product introductions, and also the competition, right? So I built that kind of model and I estimate it for you. Then the question is, what should you do based on it? So with companies, and that's in some of my practice price papers by name, what I do is I say, okay, this is what the model tells you should do, like increase or reduce the budget on specific things, change your price. And then we do a field experiment. So we typically split up the country in, let's say, 4 regions, right? In one of them is baseline. We do exactly as we did before. In the other thing, you increase the marketing actions that are supposed to be effective, given historical data, and you reduce the one that are not. So you follow all of the advice. And in the other 2 regions, we typically follow one of the 2 advices. So there's a growth region where we increase the marketing budget, but don't cut anything. This is if you're really enthusiastic, right? The other one is the cost-cutting one. So we cut the ones that the model says were not effective, and we keep the other ones constant. So we now have this beautiful field experiment with actual data, with your actual customers, and we see what happens. And so in my experience, you only have to do that once, maybe every 5 or 10 years. And everybody in the company is like, wow, and they believe it because you have done the actual thing in real life and they see the results and they see that they're better. And then, so this is the experiment report. Then I have great data variation again in your field experiment that I can model better. And so that's what the iteration. So I model because it's relatively risk, there's no risk involved there. then that gets enough buy-in from people in the organization to do an actual field experiment that convinces people, and then you have interesting new questions to answer in follow-up models and experiments. So I feel that sequence works pretty well, because I'm like, even people like on the floor that are really doing the execution are really only convinced if you make the change and they see what happens. Give you a quick example. So I once did dynamic pricing for a big fashion retailer, and the CEO completely believed me. And this was about, how much should you discount at the end of the season, which is really important, lots of money involved. And so the CEO said everybody should follow Koen's advice, but only half of the retail managers actually did it. And the CEO said, okay, so in the same city, let's say in Mumbai or in Delhi, in the same city, very comparable stores either implemented my advice or didn't. And so we could see in real time how much more money the ones were making that followed my advice. So once you have those kind of proof points, it's much easier to kind of get the organization to adapt the framework.
Professor, before we wrap up, one final question. For a mid-sized organization listening to this conversation, perhaps without a big analytics team, what is a realistic 90-day roadmap inspired from your book to go from scattered spreadsheets to a first working marketing analytics dashboard that the CEO will actually care about?
So I would say definitely start with the mental map of how you believe that customers make the decisions, and then look at the metrics that you have and how bad or how good they are, right? There may be some metrics that you get for free that you're not currently using. And so I think a big thing is kind of talking with the stakeholders in your company just to get alignment. That's always good, right? So that your goals are aligned with the CEO and the CFO in big organization, or just with the boss and the founder in a smaller organization. So I think that would be step number one. I think number two would be to take a look at if the data that you have, if they are good enough to do some open source modeling. So one of the things that I wrote a recent paper about is looking at open source models such as Google's model. You have Meta's Robin. So there's all of these open source models that you can, I think it's for free or for peanuts, right? You give your data and the algorithm makes decisions about how long effects should last. And it's not perfect, right? And I have a whole article about it in Customer Needs and Solutions that you can look up, but it makes this default decisions that are pretty good based on research. And so it does come up with, hey, this is probably the effect of your marketing actions. And so very often what I find is that it doesn't have to be so precise. I always say in marketing, it's better to be vaguely right than precisely wrong. And so multi-touch attribution, loss click attribution is typically precisely wrong. So what I mean with vaguely right is that it tells you whether you should increase or decrease your price. And of course, you're not going to follow the full advice. If I say increase your price by 30%, you'll be like, well, thank you very much. Let me increase it by 5%, see what happens, and then maybe. So very often in marketing, you're only looking for direction. Should I spend more or less on Amazon? Should I spend more or less offline or online? And so these open source models really kind of give you some insight, which you can then implement and see what happens. And then you can have some very quick hits. One of the companies I'm working with, Scanmar, so they bought over my company that works with all of the open source models, right? And so you can go to them, and what we basically do is we run all of the open source models. So we run 6 or 7 models. And then we show you as the user what they all predict and their accuracy and what kind of things they propose. And then you can still overrule them. You can still say, look, I know what's feasible in my company and what not. So you can then kind of pick and choose. And so for very small, initial money, get some very quick hits that can then get the ball rolling in terms of trust in the company.
Thank you, Professor Koen, for such an insightful and practical conversation on turning marketing data into real decision and impact. Your frameworks around dashboards, experiments, and performance-linked metrics will be incredibly valuable to our listeners as they rethink how they use data in their own organizations. To everyone tuning in, I hope today's episode inspires you not just to collect more numbers, but to ask better questions and build dashboards that truly guide action. Thanks for listening, and we will see you in the next episode of Business Talk. Thank you once again, Dr. Koen Pauwels, for sharing your time and a publication with us today. This has been a truly inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you.